Thanks, Django. That's the second time you saved my life, and I won't forget it. Look at Maria. Look at her. She can't take her eyes off you. Take her. She's a present. A night with her and a man forgets all his troubles.
No, thanks. I'd rather have this one.
Too bad, Maria. I did all I could. The gringo doesn't want you. But don't cry over him. Come and have a drink with us. We're having a big celebration. Tequila para todos.
This is the Blood of Black Rum podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Blood and Black Rum podcast. I'm Ryan from coldsploitation.com, and I'm joined with my co-host Mark.
How's it going?
Doing pretty well. It's take 2 for trying to get this episode done. And we'll go into that. But first, I want to make note that it's spaghetti time today. Spaghetti. Serving up a nice Italian style feast. I might have even used that on the last episode as well. I don't remember, but you know what? I got to thinking about it as we were talking about spaghetti westerns, and I was thinking, and I'm like, you know, it sounds pretty derogatory when you think about it.
No, it's all right.
I know it's not considered, but like when you think about it a little bit more, and you're just like, you know, Americans were making their westerns, right? Like John Wayne was making their westerns, and then all of a sudden, you know, you've got spaghetti westerns spinning up. You know, you got a Fistful of Dollars coming out, and all I can imagine is some guy sitting around being like, "You worried about those spaghetti westerns? Are you worried about those westerns that the Italians are making? Kind of like circumventing all of our stuff here?" And they're like, "Nah, those Italians, spaghetti western style things over there. No, I'm not afraid of them." It just seems like it was like something that came out derogatorily, and then it kind of stuck from there. It's just kind of funny to think about. I don't know. I was thinking about it the other day. I was like, almost sounds like they're trying to make fun of them. They're little spaghetti westerns over there. Yeah. But we wanted to do spaghetti westerns on the show because it's been a while since we've gotten back to one of those. Done a few on here, and probably should have taken stock of what we've done in the past, because we set out to do another spaghetti western, and I was going through my movies that I have, and I was like, hey, Django the Bastard. Good one to do, I guess, right? So got through the whole process. I watched the movie, loaned it over to Martin. Martin watched the movie. We talked about it. I was going off of the assumption that Martin never seen it before. I'd seen it previously in the past, but I had reviewed it. So we go to record, and for whatever reason, Martin had said something like, "Oh, didn't we do Django, the original Django?" So I went to go look up our episodes, and lo and behold, there's Django the Bastard, like episode 149 or something like that in our history. And I'm like, oh shit, we've already done Django the Bastard, which is pretty surprising because most of the time we have a good, well, at least you do. You have a good handle. You're the the historian of the podcast, of knowing what episode and when we did it and what we did. But no, most of the time we have a good handle on what we've already done. And it's very surprising that out of all of like the spaghetti westerns that we could have pick Django the Bastard, and we've done it.
And I tried talking you out of it. I listed 1,000 different films, and you're like, we're going to do Django. I want to do Django the Bastard.
I don't know.
And I could have swore the film we're doing today that we already done. So I mean, it's just Mandela effect.
I guess so. I
But
don't
also
know.
watching Django the Bastard too. Like it was like I had an uncanny feeling of as I was watching it. Like this seems pretty familiar.
Pretty familiar, yeah.
Can't quite put my finger on it, but it seems pretty familiar. But to be fair, we're almost up to episode 300, so we've almost done 300 different films. And to be honest with you, if I had to pick like 5 films that we've done that probably are in the backseat of my memory that we've ever done, Django the Bastard's probably up there.
Yeah, it's definitely like, because we've done some really random ones at certain points, and sometimes it's just hard to remember, like you said. And this was like what it was ended up being like 6 years ago that we actually did it, right? Or 5 years ago, something
2019,
like that. 2019. So it's been a while since we've done it, and I don't know. It didn't stick out to me, and I didn't feel like we've done it, and
Not like God's Gone.
no, I don't know. It's just funny. So we were like, well, guess that's out. So we scrapped recording for that night, and we went back to the drawing board, and we decided that instead of doing Django the Bastard, which is an unofficial Django sequel, it's not real. I mean,
which after watching, comparing it to the film we're doing today,
right.
These Italians and their silly nonsensical nonsense.
Exactly. There's like 30 Django films. They don't tie into each other much at all. But I mean, it only made sense to go back to the beginning and cover 1966's Django, the original Django movie.
Which I could have swore we did.
No, and I know after watching, I've never seen the movie before. You haven't either, right? Like,
no.
You just have the Mandela effect of having seen it at one point, but you had never seen it before. And no, I've never seen it. And we definitely didn't do it because we looked it up and made sure of it. And it just made sense. It made sense to like go back to the beginning, see what all the fuss is about, especially since we literally just watched Django the Bastard. We could kind of compare. And but the other thing that was on the table too was doing another film of Clint Eastwood's for a few dollars more, because we've already done A Fistful of Dollars, and that's now been like almost 2 years ago that we did that one. But Django won out mostly because we've never seen it before, so it's something new to take in, and new thing to do for the episodes since we've watched Django the Bastard twice.
Yeah. New year, new us. We'll get to A Fistful of Dollars another day, but that's something.
We did A Fistful of Dollars. We'll get for a few dollars more.
My bad.
Yeah. We don't want to go through that whole thing again. That whole charade. Yeah.
Chicanery.
So Django, 1966, about 4 years after A Fistful of Dollars released. Or 2 years after? 2 years after, yeah. Fistful was in 1964. It's 2 years after A Fistful of Dollars released. We get Django.
It's also 5 years after Yojimbo, which this is, again, another
loose
adaptation of Yojimbo.
I think that it's even looser, right?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think like it's by extension, it's like like an adaptation of an adaptation of an adaptation sort of thing. It's obviously pulling a lot from A Fistful of Dollars. It's doing the whole spaghetti western idea, but in terms of spaghetti westerns, because there's a lot of them, right? It's kind of the same thing as like all the Italian style things, giallos. Gialli, I should say. The Italian crime, poliziesquis. There's a lot of them, and they were released at a very like wham bam, all in one like era, and so there's a lot to go through. But in terms of spaghetti westerns, you have your high top tier. You got your like, it's pretty good, like medium style. And then you definitely have your low tier of movies that were, kind of thrown out there, really just cash grabs of movies that had released previously, really kind of all tackling the same sort of themes or, elements within them. A lot of them have like the mentor story, which we talked about in God's Gun, the revenge story. So there's really not a whole lot of room to maneuver. But within Django, I think one of the reasons why Django has become more of a classic in the spaghetti Western than some of the other ones is that it is actually, in my opinion, quite well made. You could tell that it has a better adherence to the realism of the time, which you kind of remarked on in Django the Bastard, where the realism of history kind of is seeping in with like 60s, 70s style, where they kind of like aren't able to hide the 60s that are kind of encroaching into like.
Well, they're not even trying. In fact, I think they're kind of flaunting it. But I mean, that's kind of like one thing, at least with spaghetti westerns in general for me, like especially like during the early, part and the ones that kind of are more grounded, like with the Leone films, is that, this strict adherence to like, look, feel, like, when you watch John Wayne films, and John Ford films, you're not seeing men running around dusters, which would be appropriate, where they're running around, bright pink shirts and, colorful yellow pants, yelling like yippee-ki-yay and riding off into the sunset, Yeah. And where, the spaghetti westerns, give us for the most part, that grounded reality, work with sometimes, and a lot of times with wry humor, but, you get that nice, like what feels like, an authentic feel to it, and part of like the spaghetti westerns later on, as the 60s go on, march on and go into the 70s, the 60s and 70s aesthetics and styles of like hippie chic and shit really starts to bleed in and kind of draws away from a lot of films because they're shot on smaller budgets, and it's like, yeah, whatever,
right,
who gives a shit if there's a left print pillow randomly.
Let's get it in there.
Yeah.
Get it shot, lay it down, and we'll deal with the rest later. I mean, and I think Django, being a reference film, you can tell that this was more strictly adhering to the history of it. That seeping in of the 60s culture is not there, and it is very similar in a lot of respects to A Fistful of Dollars in the way that it presents the protagonist. A lot of it is very similar, except it does go in it's a slightly different direction throughout its play. So let's take a break there real quick. Don't want to go too far into Django. Let's talk about the beer or I guess we should say non-beer again, that we have on the show. Because again, it's dry January. So we've been very careful. Well, I have been very careful. I just had wine. So me drinking a non-alcoholic beer, whoop-de-doo. So for non-alcoholic beer, I did adhere to Martin's rules of dry January, because it was my turn to get something. And so I went out, and I've known about this one for a bit, and just never had a chance to. And actually, to be honest with you, this brewery is not one that I've had a whole lot of, even though it is pretty readily available around here. For whatever reason, just haven't really gone out of my way to get it. I've had a couple from them, but we're talking about Industrial Arts Brewing, and they always adhere to like a very strict theme in terms of their beer output. It's like literally industrial. Most of the time, it's like names of tools for their beers. I think they have Wrench is their like bog standard IPA. And for their non-alcoholic beer, and I think the one that they had first started with, it's called Safety Glasses, and it's an IPA. And when I was checking out Safety Glasses, the lady that was, because obviously with non-alcoholic beers, you still need to get carded for whatever reason. So I was checking out and getting carded. She was like, "Oh, does that come with Safety Glasses? Such a weird name for a beer." And I was like, "Well, lady, you don't even know the whole extent of it. If Safety Glasses is the weirdest beer name that you've ever heard, because they get weirder, lady. They get weirder." So yeah. And also to note, they have a Pils now too, which I did not know about. I'd known about the Safety Glasses IPA, but I didn't know they had a Pilsner in the non-alcoholic style. So good to know, and possibly be checking that out at some point.
Look at that. They got readily now. We'll have to get Any Beer, which is a modern classic lager, which is made with everyday New York grown corn, gently kissed with citron cascade for a modern flavor profile.
Gently kissed.
I can't wait for that. That just sounds delightful.
So as an IPA, this non-alcoholic beer, think it comes in at like less than 0.5% alcohol. Tastes basically like the other non-alcoholic IPA I've had, which I've had Athletic Brewing's IPA. And this one is like super similar. I think they probably use the same hops. I think they use like Citra Mosaic and one other hop varietal, I believe. Cascade. Cascade.
And it's a West Coast IPA too, not
Yep.
NIPA.
Oh yeah, for sure. But it tastes basically the same as the one from Athletic. They're very, very similar. They have the same flavor profile to them. And actually Athletics was just Citra and Mosaic. So Industrial adds Cascade as well. It's like, I think they're good to drink. They do the job just fine. The IPAs, they always tend to have like a very samey, like kind of watery, kind of hop water flavor to them. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because I do enjoy that flavor. It's just that if you're looking for mouthfeel and robustness, the non-alcoholic IPAs, they don't reach that level, at least in my opinion. And this one doesn't either. I think it's solid. It's a good representation of an IPA. It just doesn't manage to get like that full body that you would expect from an IPA, in my opinion. How about you? What do you think?
I agree. It's a lot like it's a lot like Athletics, and I would say I've also had Brooklyn's bog standard non-alcoholic IPA too, and they all have really the same kind of taste. Nice hoppiness to it, a little bit piney, but because it's an NA, the mouthfeel is very watery, very thin. Also too, I'll note that all three of them too also have because it's in non-alcoholic and it doesn't really have a mouthfeel to it or any real presence outside of like the malt and the hop itself. You definitely, with the maltiness and the breadiness of the West Coast IPA style, get kind of like a rye, peppery aftertaste to it. And that's something that like all three of the non-alcoholic IPAs I've had kind of have, is like a rye pepperiness to it. So it's not bad, but it's definitely, they're not anything that hits the spot. Like if you're looking for like an IPA, it just does. I don't think there's a substitution for it. It's just like, okay, that's something. But
yeah, and like it does remind me of hop water. I'm not saying it's maybe necessarily as watery, but it has that same mouthfeel of like the wateriness to it. The hop varietals coming out. I would say that hop water is like a little bit crisper. It's like having a seltzer that somebody hit up with a bunch of hops. So it's a little bit like crisper in terms of, if you're looking for something to quench your thirst, hop water is kind of the better substitution. As a non-alcoholic beer, if this is what if you've got to have something and you want an IPA, it's going to be Approximation. It's not the best approximation of an IPA, and like you said, it probably is difficult to really pull that off. But I think from the ones that I've had, this is very similar, and it's probably about the closest you're going to get to a real IPA without the alcohol. So they did a good job. I mean, I think it's definitely drinkable. It's kind of similar to a session. So not bad.
Now, the one thing I kind of want to mention before we get off like the dry train, I'm sure everyone has seen the White Claw at 0%ers.
Oh yeah.
Like, what's the point? I don't understand.
Now that literally is seltzer.
I mean,
it's just a seltzer.
So you're paying for a 12-pack, $18+ for it when you could literally just buy fucking Polar Seltzer. $18 worth of Polar Seltzer is like 50 cans of Polar Seltzer.
Right.
So I don't understand. I want to know who's gonna run out and buy that. I might buy it for like a meme one of these days. Like when I get my tax return, like the first thing I do is like, oh, look what I'm gonna do with my money. But other than that, I don't understand.
I don't either. It's definitely not crashing down the door to get that. Can you imagine somebody rolling up with the non-alcoholic seltzers to a party or something?
Hell, they even have calories. 15 calories.
Oh yeah.
So it's not even seltzer. Like
So you're way better off just going for seltzer.
So I don't understand. Like what you're gonna tell me that like, the lime White Claw NA is gonna be as crisp and refreshing as a Polar Lime Seltzer? I think not.
Agreed. Polar is extremely refreshing, so I just can't imagine. I feel like it's gonna have the sort of fake sugary flavor of a White Claw without the refreshing quench to it.
Yeah, I just don't get it. It's like super memey. Like you'd think like this, like that's something like the Onion would put out.
Yeah, right. Like a fake thing. Like
yeah,
now coming soon.
Which, as I'm looking up on the Google box, there is a Reddit forum called Not the Onion, and that's like one of the top things. Is White Claw launches new 0%. It's so stupid. But yeah, so if anyone's out there, is gonna go give that a shot, let me know.
Yeah, try it out. See what
I'm
you
still
think.
I'm still pissed about paying like $24 for Happy Dad seltzer. So
yeah, if you got stupid money to drop, then go for it. Pound them in a day, Show how much. So show the money you've got. All right, let's get into Django in depth. So as we said, we'd never seen this one before, which is kind of interesting. Like it is a classic spaghetti western. Not considering Sergio Leone films, but Sergio Corbucci directs Django from 1966, a movie about the aforementioned Django.
Django.
Yeah, and you kind of got to get that in there at some point. Just the
that nice Tom Jones song.
Django, he's a man who was in love previously. It's nice too because the Tom Jones songs in this, in true 60s and 70s fashion, the theme song gives you all the backstory you need to know, especially the end song where it kind of goes into it's like he was in love and then he lost her and then he came back and then
is it up there with Shaft? Shaft needs to be a man. No, not the theme. The one song from Shaft
where it just
we used
the narrative.
It's like Shaft is a man. Or so is that the top three? The Django song, the Shaft be a man, love women, or from Smokey and the Bandit, like Bandit. Bandit's a man.
I know. Like I said, it was a thing that in the 60s and 70s you would put your whole fucking narrative into the theme song.
Not only that, trailers too. You need to see. It's amazing that movies even sold back then because you could see the whole film in 3 minutes in the trailer.
Yeah. Well, I'm good. I got the gist.
The whole story's told.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and this one, Django is kind of like, a mysterious man. You don't really know much about his past. doesn't really go into it in all that depth besides the theme song. And at times he'll talk about a woman that he loved and she's dead and gone. That comes later in the movie. So it is helpful to kind of get that backstory from the soundtrack. But Django in this movie, when we first meet him, he's a guy who's dragging a fucking coffin through mud. And
first the desert.
Yeah, the desert, and then through mud. I mean, I was thinking, as he's dragging that coffin through the mud, just, think about me having to drag my son in a sled in the snow. I think I would probably give that thing up only like 50 feet in. Yeah. Once it gets a little bit muddy and I'm like, all right, I'm done with this. I'm leaving it. No, thank you.
You figure it out.
I don't have the fortitude to go about doing that, or at least put like skis on it, put runners on it or something, like a toboggan. Make it a little bit easier to get through the mud. So the town that he's going to is full of mud shit. It's just a fucking shitty, muddy mess because everybody's left it.
The toboggan's gone. Okay, we already did Lacey Chabert gifts.
Yeah.
So we're on and past. By the way, so I think I know why I thought we did Django. Even though I know our first episode is Man, Pride, and Vengeance, the thumbnail you got there is the German film name, and it's got Django in it.
True.
So I think that's why, and stars Franco Nero. So I think that's where the wires got crossed.
Could be. When we first meet Django though in this movie, he's come upon a woman who's been abused by both Mexicans.
Well, first, she's getting, roughed up by Mexicans. They get gunned down by the Klan, and then Django and they rough her up, and because she was getting roughed up by Mexicans, and then Django shows up and then mows them down.
Yeah, it's a whole thing, and it kind of sets up your first encounter with the two factions that Django's going to be dealing with. You've got General Hugo and his Mexican banditos, and you've got the Confederate Major Jackson, who is also kind of a psychotic mess, who's been basically just dealing with Mexicans in and around the area and fucking kidnapping them, making them run through the desert, and then picking them off as he sees fit, like they're fucking hunting pigeons or something like that.
Which apparently there is some historical reference from that. That is something that was done in Brazil up into the 1950s or something like.
It's I guess it's in the movie. It almost seems comically evil. Like it's too.
It definitely is
far fetched, especially during the scenes that they show of it, where they're like, "Hey, yeah, get on, boy," and then, it's like. It's comically evil, but you're right. Historically, you can't really make that shit up in terms of how far human evil will go, I guess.
Well, not only that too. The one, the Major's like right hand man has like a mustache twirling, mustache. So, that's maybe why.
Possibly.
He's Dick Dastardly.
So basically, you got Django here in the middle of these two factions, and you've got Maria, who he's just saved from certain death. First, she's being whipped, thrown around, and he saves her from it. And he basically brings her with him along. He's like, "I'm going to town. You come with me." And he brings her to town with his little coffin. And at the town, he finds out, hey, this town has been basically ransacked by both gangs. And Major Jackson specifically has been coming to get protection money from the bartender to not really do much of anything. Basically just like maybe sometimes stop Mexicans from trashing up the bar, because we know that both of them are kind of like have run this town into the ground. Basically, there's no town left. It's just the fucking bar and some prostitutes hanging out at the bar, and that's it. So that kind of sets up this whole idea of like, well, whose side is Django on? And the film kind of gives you that information of like, previously he fought for the Union. You've got Confederate soldiers who are leading one side of the faction. You got Mexicans who are leading the other. Which side is he going to fall on? Right. And in true spaghetti Western fashion, especially with like mysterious stranger figures, we don't really get to see the moralism of Django. He doesn't have any really. He doesn't really care that much about what goes on between the two. It's more about like what's, selfishly, what does he want to get out of it? Which I like a lot. Like, how do you feel about that in terms of like moralism from Django as a person?
It's fine. It's definitely, just these films are a counterpoint to again, like the John Ford style Western of,
good guys.
There's the good guy and the bad guy. It's either, John Wayne, the rest of, the whiteys either taking on the red man or the Mexicans or, the rustlers. America always wins. Here you get that moral ambiguity, but at the same time, that kind of shtick of only works so well depending on your protagonist, because everybody in this movie is a cretinous piece of shit.
Sure.
There's and sometimes too, that's a thing that a lot of these like films kind of run into a problem of is being dark for the sake of dark. You definitely see
I mean,
more. I'd say being nihilistic doesn't mean it's got depth.
Sure. And I think that in this movie we do get at least a little bit of that moralism. Obviously we do, to a certain extent, Django doesn't really care what happens here. Like he doesn't, and honestly, he's kind of an asshole through some of the movie. Like he unnecessarily shoots up the bartender's bar for like no reason.
Just to show like his fucking machine gun off. Like
So it's not like we're saying like Django is like this really nice guy who's like, I've got to save the women and I've got to do this and that and help people and help the bartender and care about it. He doesn't really care that much. If it suits him, he will help. And I think moralistically, the film does go into it a little bit. Like, obviously, there is some morals to stepping in and helping Maria at the beginning of the movie. There is some moral elements to it about how, he finds out that Major Jackson is basically just like killing these Mexicans, and how Major Jackson feels like he's a superior race because they're basically, the equivalent of the Klansmen, like the KKK. They wear red hoods in this one.
I would say that was a thing back then, red shirts.
Yeah. And it's in this one, Major Jackson specifically says the superiority of, them as white people, takes precedence over the Mexicans. So you kind of have that moralistic element too, but overall Django doesn't really care that much. And I guess what it eventually boils down to in terms of what he's really trying to do is get a bunch of gold. And I feel like the film doesn't really go too well into the motivation of Django in terms of like what this gold is really going to do for him. Like we know he wants it. We know he wants to like start a new life basically. And ultimately like the coffin is sort of a reminder for him as well to like leave the name of Django behind. And like leave his past life and presumably the woman that was killed behind. But ultimately, like, what is this mountainous pile of gold and small, annoyingly small chunks going to do, it's not really that clear. Like the film doesn't really go into it. And that too, the whole idea that that's what Django's looking for doesn't really come out for probably 2/3 of the movie, I want to say. What do you think, like, about the plotting? I think that's my biggest peeve in terms of, like, ultimately why are we embroiled in this conflict? Is that there really isn't an overall reason per se that it occurs.
It's definitely, I agree. It's definitely a lot more muddled in comparison to Fistful of Dollars. At least in Fistful of Dollars, Clint shows up in the town. There's two, fighting factions. Two different bosses, and who are at odds. And then Clint plays both sides to try to get their money in gold.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I think it's a little just muddled up because it's kind of like, there's, Confederates and then there's Mexicans running around. And Django shows up the town. It's not, but I think though, the film's not really interested in the who, the why you're getting there. It's just kind of like, here's the premise and go.
It just kind of happens. Yeah.
And that's why, like, everyone for the most part is very ambiguous overall and all shrouded in mystery for the most part. I don't think it's a bad thing though, because I think the film is paced well enough and has enough going on and action and such that it's definitely, doesn't falter because of that. But it's definitely, like, again, it's not interested in the nuance of the story. It's more interested, like, here's our beats, like, here's our beginning, here's our middle, and here's, our end. Fill it out.
Yeah. And you're right. It's definitely, well paced, because if you compare this to the Django the Bastard, which we literally just watched yesterday, this one is much better in terms of presenting a clear story that is not, doesn't suffer from like poor editing. This moves at a nice clip. It's like, here's your introduction to the Confederates. Here's your introduction to the Mexicans. Django's going to fight both of them at some point. And like about maybe 20, 30 minutes in, when we really start to meet the Major Jackson and his group of Confederates and racists, there's a nice little standoff in town where he basically says, get, like, how many men you got? He's like, I got 48 men. He's like, well, bring them all. Bring them all to town. It's a nice little standoff. And then, you don't even have to wait.
Which is, I say, it's a lot like the standoff in A Fistful of Dollars, where they come out and Clint's doing the whole, like, I need 3 coffins.
Mm-hmm.
Walks out and puts them down. He's like, better make it 4. Here it's like it's the same like setup, and it's kind of shot for shot, kind of really similar. And then instead, he just fucking whips out a machine gun and just mows them all down. So that it's like, that's pretty nifty.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is you don't have to wait for a long portion of the movie to find out like why he's lugging around this coffin for no reason. You find out right then and there. Oh, he's got a machine gun in there that he's been just keeping in there and bringing with him as a just in case.
Which animes have, ever since taken note. Oh, so cool.
Absolutely.
That coffin and shoot machine gun.
If your spaghetti Western inspired anime doesn't have a machine gun in it, then what are you doing? Yeah. I mean, I like that. I like the setup, because it's like first half hour, there's Confederates, like you're kind of dealing with the Confederates. Second half hour, there's the Mexicans. You're kind of dealing with the Mexicans as Django kind of gets into their faction and basically comes up with this plan to rob a fort of their gold. And it's Major Jackson's fort, basically. And then after that, after that 30-minute period, then you've got Django kind of setting out on his own.
Which that whole fort sequence too, I'm pretty sure Red Dead Redemption took whole
Yes.
cloth for when you sneak into Fort Mercer with
Yeah.
the West Dickens and you Gatling gun everyone down.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can see like all the similarities to it as well. In terms of like the setting itself, the how the fort looks and everything. I really loved though when the guys are waiting and they see the wagon pulling up and they're like, "Oh, the girls are here!" And literally, guys are coming out of the woodwork like fucking termites. It's just like
Women,
there's only 3 women for the 75 men around, so I hope they've brought some lube. It's gonna be a rough day.
That would be great if somebody dubbed in there like oh, women, and just hear somebody yell boobies.
Yeah. But it's a good scene, and I like the whole idea of like infiltrating this fort, getting the gold, and then getting out. And it showcases too. What I really like too is like it showcases like the Confederate versus Mexican shooting style, because you've got the Confederates, they're like very calmly like lining up shots with their rifles and stuff, and then you got the Mexicans two-handing it sometimes.
Well, those weren't Confederates. That was the Mexican army. Jackson was down at the fort in Mexico.
Oh, the Mexican army, right?
Yeah, so because his guys have all been already wiped out, so that was the Mexican army that he was down at, and they go down to the fort in Mexico to get the gold that he stashed down there. But I like more that they're just wearing these nice bright white uniforms, looking so clean cut and dapper.
They do. The last half hour, like I said, you kind of get Django's kind of breaking off for both of them. At that point, he's breaking away from the Mexicans. They've already taken the gold. It's become pretty clear they don't really want to share that gold. Django said, we made a deal. I'll be leaving with my half of the gold. And, you've got General Hugo, who's basically like wishy-washy. Like, yeah, we got the gold here. Why don't you stay a while and we'll divvy it up at some point, but not right now. So Django kind of makes off with it. It's a pretty cool scene too when he steals the gold, because of just the logistics of watching Franco Nero go through these motions of like, climbing out through the window, pulling the coffin with him, maneuvering it down through, from the roof and stuff like that. It's a pretty cool scene.
It's like a fucking Splinter Cell bit. He's like,
yes, yeah.
He just stealthily drag a coffin across like the wood boards above, and like,
Yeah, it's pretty hilarious though to think about, like having to drag the coffin around. Just and you know what? You know how you do that? You have a busty woman in the window that the men get to watch undress. As simple as that. You know what? The thing is that he made it look so easy being stealthy like that. He didn't have to. Could have dropped fucking dynamite back there, and they'd be like, "What? Huh? I don't know. There's a busty woman in the window."
Well, he ended up doing that.
Yeah, he did after, but and unfortunately too, that this is where I'm talking about Django being kind of an asshole in this movie. After he saves Maria, and he basically just gives her back to the Mexicans, he's like, "Here, you take her."
Well, I don't
fucking care.
But before that, after he kills all the Klansmen, essentially, the red shirts, she's up in the. They go upstairs into her room, and he's like, "Yeah, I bet you feel like a real woman now, don't you?" And she's like, "I do." And he's like, "Yeah." And then they have sex off screen, but still, it's like, it's not much better than the Mexicans and the Klansmen. He's just like, yeah. I mean, at least Clint in his movies, he ain't got time for women. Period. He's too busy. I got money to make. Yeah, this one does kind of come off smarmy, kind of sleazy.
Yeah, sleazy, because when I guess that it's the dialogue. It's the way that he like presents it. She's like, "I've never felt more like a woman than what you've made me." And he's like, "Oh yeah." And he just like comes over and basically takes her. Like in the script, it just says Django takes her. because of the way that it just plays off is just, pretty sleazy. And then later on, when you take into account how he treats her later and gives her to the
Well, I know.
Mexicans.
Yeah, when he's like, when they're like, you can have her, and he's like, I don't fucking need her.
Yeah, I don't want her. I'd rather have this one. And he takes like another woman, the other prostitute down.
Yeah.
It's just, again, it's like one of those things. And then later on too, then you have Maria, who basically admits her love for him. Django. She's like, what do you love about Django? You literally just met him.
Protector.
Yeah, I mean, what do you like? He's an asshole to you. Doesn't want you.
That's why. It's hot.
He's the bad boy.
Listen, I know after you gun down 50 Klansmen with a machine gun, the first thing you need to do is a shot of tequila and do some humping. So that's why he went in there after. He's like, all right, this is what this place is meant for.
That's right. What do you think about the whole idea of breaking Django's hands?
That is great. So that part at the end is what makes this film like pretty cool. Because you don't ever really see in films generally your protagonists get like the total shit beaten out of them by at the end, roughed up to hell, and basically on the losing end. Mm-hmm. They destroy his hands.
Yeah.
And they look awful after, they capture him and they shoot Maria. And General Hugo's like, we don't kill thieves. Not, because we're thieves ourselves. But we do teach them a lesson. One guy takes the butt of his Winchester and just breaks his hands into a million pieces. It's fucking brutal and it's fucking awesome.
And so a couple things. Django as a movie is a lot more brutal than probably many of the other spaghetti westerns that you've seen. A lot of times the spaghetti westerns, like the shootouts revolve into like, gunfire, guy falls off a roof.
Like twist and fall.
Yeah.
Wilhelm scream. They do use sometimes in here, like they had a budget for like 5 squibs.
Yeah.
So like they used like one squib when the guy gets shot in the eye and he's like,
yes.
But I mean, it's also too that very like Dawn of the Dead, hyper fake, blood. Like it's like super pink. Kind of, it doesn't really look like blood.
Yeah.
Which is why it's funny when you think about it today. Like this film was considered too violent. And it's like,
yeah, I mean, it's definitely more violent than some of the other spaghetti westerns. It has more blood. It has that guy getting shot in the eye. And I think it's quite a bit more brutal than what you generally see. The other thing I wanted to point out too is that you mentioned that normally the hero doesn't really get his ass kicked that much. Django gets his ass kicked a couple times. Shows that he's not quite that good at fisticuffs. At least not as good as he is with his gun shooting. Because there's that one scene in Hugo's bar where a guy's fighting him and he gets pummeled for quite a while.
Yeah, Ricardo. Yeah, when they get into a little scuff about how, because Ricardo's mad that the prostitute won't go with him, and they get into a fight. Yeah, he gets his ass like beat up.
Yeah, Django just barely makes it out of that scuffle. So yeah, this film does kind of show that a couple times, but the ending where he gets his hands broken, that's pretty great because, obviously a gunfighter, that makes sense too, because you don't want Django coming back anymore. So Hugo's like, well, you know what? Let's get rid of his, the only way that he's going to be able to come find us. It's a great scene. And I think that the end of the movie itself has a lot of great moments. Surprisingly, especially in dubbing, English dubbing, for spaghetti westerns, it can be very hit or miss. But I think whoever did Major Jackson's dubbing, Eduardo Friardo, whoever did that dubbing did a very good job with Major Jackson, because it does come off like a very menacing standoff quite a bit. When it not even like so much that he's like psychotically evil that we see other times, but like when he's just like taunting Django, especially at the end of the movie. It's a really well done scenes that you'd see more of now in like Justified, shows like Justified, where they kind of get like that standoff dialogue going. I think it does a really good job at that. And then the end of the movie where Django basically sets up this showdown in the cemetery between Major Jackson and himself. And he's literally like dropping the gun all over the place. He can't hold it in his hands. He's got it set up, and he has to rip off the little metal underneath the trigger.
The hand guard?
Yeah, the hand guard with his teeth, and then like try to prop it up on like a metal sign in the cemetery.
All that was missing when he was doing that was
I like that a lot though. I like that the whole idea of him, like finagling with the gun, really like struggling with it, dropping it all over. It looked, even watching it and watching Franco Nero do that looked very frustrating. Like you have to like pick it up with his arms and prop it up on the metal and stuff like that. I think they did a really good job with that ending scene. But the one thing I will say is that I accidentally like hit the button to see how much time was left. And I looked and I was like, there's 1 fucking minute left. How is this wrapping up? He hasn't even shot anybody. Like they're literally just doing a standoff. There's 1 fucking minute in the film left. Because this is one of those films that just is like, done. Over. No end credits.
just Finn.
Yeah, the end. It has a quick wrap up, but I liked it. I like it a lot. The one thing I will say about the movie, in terms of like shootouts, is I don't think the shootouts are necessarily that
Cool.
Yeah, they're not that suspenseful. They're not that cool. Probably solely because a lot of them are just like machine gun mowing down. It's like there's no real risk to Django for a lot of it. There's not a lot of like back and forth gunfights. And I think that maybe is one of the lower points in this movie, is that you don't get to see some of like the actual expertise of gunfighting.
The beginning in the bar is like probably the one.
Mm-hmm.
When he first shows up and he, shoots, the 5 guys that are with Jackson.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's like the real, like, most like suspenseful. It's not really suspenseful, but like kind of cool. And he, even, Franco Nero even twirls the gun a little bit and then says, I only have 1 bullet left. That wouldn't be fair. So that's what you're talking about. Like, how many men you got? 48? Bring them all down so, you have a chance. That's cool, but the rest of them are very, just man. The first machine gun, killing is pretty cool because that's like, oh, you get to see, take the gun out, his gun out of the coffin, mow everyone down. It's cool, but by the time you get to like the 4, it's just a one side massacre. When he's in town, trying to make his escape from the, General Hugo, it's just another stupid. This one even dumber massacre. The whole, Hugo getting mowed down by the Mexican army. Kind of cool, but at the same time, like, very serendipitous that, they were on the right, path going along. And
yeah, I think that's probably, I guess the shootouts are like the mowing down is fine, but like, you're right. It happens like 4 times in the movie where one side is just completely blindsided and obliterated, and it doesn't really leave a whole lot of back and forth action between the two. So I think that might be one of the areas that I think Django could have done a little bit better. How do you feel about Franco Nero in the role?
Well, because we don't get to hear his voice at all, he does a great job. His acting throughout is damn great. Like his facial expressions, his look, he definitely does look like a good surly version of Clint Eastwood. Does a great job in this. And a lot of the acting that he does, again with like his hands after, they get broken, and the way he was like futzing around with a gun and all of that, he did a tremendous job in this film. And he's definitely one of the reasons why to watch this film, is because he does such a standout job in it.
Yeah, I agree. I think he did a great job with the dubbing. you're kind of left with an unfortunate voice actor for the dubbing, who doesn't necessarily get across the intent of what Franco Nero is going for. But I think overall, presence wise, Franco Nero does a really good job. And compared to like when we watched Django the Bastard with Anthony Stephan, much better at portraying the role in like a serious but menacing way at times. I think he does a much better job, and even sometimes a little bit of a like comicalness to it too. I think he does what he can without actually having his voice in the dialogue, doing the dialogue. So yeah,
he's definitely too for him at least, like the worst parts for him in the film are when he's kind of clinting it up a little bit too much. Because when he's out there doing like his own thing, it's definitely the best. Because there are definitely points in this film, where he's totally, just doing the clinch stick. But when it kind of goes and does his own thing, much better for it.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else that we didn't cover in terms of the stuff in the movie?
What'd you think of that quicksand?
The quicksand comes out of nowhere, and it's kind of a funny scene too, because like we'd never seen Django be like that.
Oh, damn it!
He like accidentally tosses a gun, it fucking goes off. Horse kicks, bucks the coffin down the hill, and then you see him kind of like see the coffin rolling down. He's like, not a big deal. And then all of a sudden, the camera zooms in and is like, what? Quicksand! Most inconvenient quicksand placement ever. As the coffin rolls into the quicksand and sinks to the bottom.
I also, with the gold, I also like too that the gold is literally just like, looks like sawdust shavings.
Yeah. And they dump it on the floor. I'm thinking like that'd be such an annoyance to have to pick up all that little pieces of gold
into like the livery stable. So it's already like filled with like hay and stuff, but it's so funny too because it's like it's not gold bars or anything. Like and it just looks like sawdust. So when he's putting it in the coffin, he's like it just looks like he's lining the coffin with fucking sawdust.
I know.
Which that part too, with the whole shootout there is stupid because he like sets the machine gun up, lets dynamite go off, and then they just come like, what's going on down there?
Yeah, come waltzing in as literally bullets are flying out the door, and everybody just keeps coming running in a massacred line.
Which also too, that thing would have gotten jammed real quick because it's belt fed, and the whole point of of having like a gunner when like you're machine gunning like a belt fed machine gun is, you have somebody there to help feed the belt so it doesn't get jammed up. So that thing would have like went and then just spit on, and it would have been like, what was that?
So you don't think it would have worked the way that it's depicted in this movie? Also,
too, the fact that it's like 1860 whatever the fuck. 1870 whatever the fuck, and he's running around with what looks like to be like a modified like M1918 machine gun, not even like a Maxim or anything, kind of funny. But
all right, so we got to give Django a rating. Django. So on a scale of 0 to 10 Friar Tuck haircuts for our bartender, what would you give
Nathaniel?
Yeah,
good old Nathaniel.
What would you give Django?
I'll give it an 8 out of 10. It's a lot of fun. It's a good, really well made spaghetti western. Franco Nero definitely carries this film. Again, there's a lot of similarities in this between this and A Fistful of Dollars. It's unavoidable from what they were doing. But I think this film succeeds in more parts than A Fistful of Dollars because it's got better pacing than A Fistful of Dollars has. For the most part, it's a lot more engaging than A Fistful of Dollars, even though Fistful of Dollars is a really good movie. It is kind of plotting compared to the rest of Leone's work. Franco Nero's great in this. He looks great. He's got great presence, especially when he's doing his own thing instead of a Clint impression. I think the whole carrying a fucking coffin with a machine gun, it's stupid, but it's a great idea. And you can definitely see why it's iconic. It has that imagery has kind of lasted over the years. I think the idea of the two warring factions in this being Confederates and Mexicans is ex-Confederates and Mexicans it's okay. It doesn't I don't really think they do much outside of just kind of be there for the sake of being there. Again, the movie's not really concerned too much with having great nuance in its plot. It's more like A to B to C. But the film at 90 minutes is a quick, brisk, easy watch, well-paced. Things move, pretty briskly. Just everyone's a horrible, cretinous, lecherous piece of shit in this movie. But that's, usually the spaghetti western
That's fare. How it goes.
Because it's, they're kind of nihilistic. But, Franco's a little bit more nihilistic in this than your usual hero or anti-hero. But I think it's, a darn good film. I liked it a lot. I thought it was, pretty engaging, pretty fun, and I'm kind of sad that's the first time that I watched it. I'm kind of sad that there's 30 spin-offs now because they obviously probably missed the point. Like with Django the Bastard. Even though in this movie he's blatantly a ex-Union soldier, in Django the Bastard he's an ex-Confederate. So, you silly, stupid Italians.
They kind of get it wrong, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I would give this an 8 out of 10. I had a lot of fun with it. I thought it was really good. In terms of a spaghetti western, definitely a higher tier. I really enjoy Franco Nero in the role. And I liked the idea that it's A Fistful of Dollars, but kind of changes things up. Maybe a little bit more violent. Maybe goes a little bit of different directions with the Confederacy and Mexicans, while still basically maintaining the same basic storyline of what they're going for. I think that all of the shootouts it probably could have been better. And part of that is just because of the overpowered machine gun that kind of makes an appearance a few times throughout the movie. But with that said, I think that it has a lot of good standoffs. I think Major Jackson as a character is pretty cool, despite his psychotic kind of over the top nature sometimes. And I had a lot of fun with it. It's definitely one that I would revisit again. And I can understand the appeal of it, and why it's considered one of the better spaghetti western movies of the time. And looking forward to potentially picking up Arrow Video's 4K of it at some point. Add it to my collection. Fun stuff. And miles better than Django the Bastard as well, which we had readily available to compare to. All right. I think we know what's up next for next episode, right?
Yeah. So next
we already have it picked out.
Yeah. Next week we'll be back. Because Ryden sillily mentioned when we were talking about westerns to do, he's like, well, it's not a spaghetti western, but how about There Will Be Blood?
Mm.
To which I said, oh my. He says,
yeah, we got to do it.
It's one of my favorite films of all time. And it's kind of sad that you haven't even watched it.
Never seen it.
It's a 3-hour film, so get yourself ready.
Got to get prepared. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, not sure why I haven't watched it, but gonna rectify that. So, yeah,
it's fantastic.
So you want to tune in for our episode on There Will Be Blood?
Maybe we'll also do a book club episode. We'll do Upton Sinclair's Oil, which the book is loosely based on.
There you go.
It's a nice, brisk 530 pages.
I'd read it. All right, so definitely tune in for our episode on There Will Be Blood next. You could pretty much get it on any podcast app that you can think of. We're on Google Podcasts, which I think is going away, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or home base. So anywhere you subscribe to podcasts, we're on it. So subscribe to us. Leave us a nice review. Appreciate that. We are on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for us on there, Blood and Black Rum Podcast. We also have an email address at bloodandblackrumpodcast@gmail.com. Write to us. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, what movies you want us to consider. You can also donate to us on our Spotify page or at Patreon. Whatever you want to donate, we will put back towards beer. So we appreciate that in advance. Or possibly 0% White Claw. So who knows? We'll waste your money on it, not ours. So thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed our episode on Django and spaghetti westerns. Hope you, if you do want to hear our episode on Django the Bastard, which we were initially going to do, go back to like episode 149 or something. I think it is. It's there. Did that a few years ago. So thanks for listening. We'll be back with There Will Be Blood next week. And until then,
Take care.